After you, 006.
This is the first time that we ever have a story that directly involves a fellow 00.
002.
003.
004. 006.
007.
008. 009.
We've never met any of them. It's always just somebody died.
But we don't see him as a character. They're more of just either a mention or just a plot device for the story to continue. But they're not a character. Yeah. And this is the first time we actually get a character.
What I really appreciate about the character Alec Trevelyan is that he's something of a meta Bond critic. It's as if he's aware of all the Bond tropes, and he's constantly commenting on them.
James Bond, Her Majesty's loyal terrier. No glib remark? No pithy comeback?
I might as well ask you if all the vodka martinis ever silenced the screams of all the men you've killed.
Where is she?
Ah, yes. Your fatal weakness. Or if you find forgiveness in the arms of all those willing women for all the dead ones you failed to protect. 007's loyalty was always to the mission. Your friend or the mission? Never to his friend. The girl or the mission? For England, James.
For England, James?
For England! James. For England.
For England, Alec.
Talking about the prologue, which, for me, I think this is just the best prologue. Up to this point, this prologue is not only action-packed, and it's another beautifully far-fetched James Bond-esque, over-the-top prologue where he literally skydives into a plane, which he then pulls out of an impossible dive. It's about the emotion of that moment more than about, like, well, if it was at that angle, that's bullshit. You know, who cares? Because it's glorious.
I was able to see by it, but I was like, that's a tall mountain, man.
But here's my question, though. A more practical thing than arguing about something like that is when it comes to Alec Trevelyan himself, right? Yeah. So after you've seen the movie, you know that that whole prologue is bullshit from his standpoint. He may or may not have orchestrated the whole thing. He certainly faked his death. And he says at one point, you were supposed to die for me.
You were supposed to die for me.
The main question from that is, do you guys think Alec wanted Bond to escape? Or was Bond supposed to die? Because Alec fakes his death there so that he can assume the head of a criminal organization. So it would be to his advantage to let 007 survive so he could report back that 006 had been killed. But at the same time, Alec wanted him to die. So do you guys think that Alec wanted James Bond to escape the prologue?
Yeah, that's actually a tough one.
Charlie, I think you make a good point, but I do think thematically it fits in with the story with how everybody in this movie's like, why are you still part of MI6? And it seems like he's like, his whole thing was, I got to get out of the MI6, get out of the spy for England's world.
Did you ever ask why? Why we toppled all those dictators, undermined all those regimes? Only to come home. Well done, good job, but sorry, old boy. Everything you risked your life and limb for has changed.
And, do things on my own for more financial gain than anything else.
England is about to learn the cost of betrayal. Inflation adjusted for 1945.
So let's lay it out, right? So Alec, again, if you've seen the movie before, you know that he's the traitor. They both show up to the Archangel, which, by the way, your whole Misha and Petia thing, you have Archangel. Michael, Archangel facility in the USSR. Anyway, they show up there. We have our first gadget, which is both a retractable grappling gun and a laser, which is then echoed when he uses a watch laser through the floor. But shows up there, meets up with 006. Their whole mission is to blow up these gas tanks.
Blow the gas tanks!
Because it's a chemical factory.
Yeah. And to Sean Bean's credit, the moment that he says, for England, James...
James? For England.
For England, Alec.
And Bond looks at him like, well, yeah, for England. You sense a little bit of like, in that moment. It's like, that's weird. That's a little too Boy Scoutish, right? I mean, James Bond is never so upfront about his patriotic intentions. So you get a sense of like, that's kind of weird. And then next, you get...
It's too easy. Half of everything is luck, James.
And the other half? Fate.
Yeah. And then at that point, you have a terrific scene where Bond is surrendering, and think of it like, what was their plan, right? Ormov and Alec had clearly worked together to create this illusion that he was going to get killed. And this is why I asked the question. It is in 006's benefit to have 007 survive so he can report that 006 was killed. For England, James! And then he gets shot, and he watches him get shot.
Move out. Throw down your weapon and walk towards me. Slowly.
Finish the job, James. Blow them all to hell.
You'll have 10 seconds.
So the question becomes, who is that theatricality and deception for? Is it for Bond? Is it for the guards? It could be for the guards. It could be that Ormov didn't want everybody to know that he was working with a Brit. So ultimately it's left vague, but it's just kind of odd that if he wanted Bond dead so badly,
You're supposed to die for me.
why didn't he just shoot Bond in the face the moment he had him staring down the barrel of a gun? So that's something where I kind of wish there had been a little element of, something that really allowed Bond to get away. In the same way that he said it was a little too easy to get into the gas chamber, it was a little too easy to get away. And then at that point, instead of Alex saying,
You're supposed to die for me.
he could say something like, you thought you escaped, but we let you get away. Who do you think put that plane there on the runway just as you were escaping? That was me.
Are you saying this movie's not perfect?
None of these movies are perfect. Let's be real. This movie's amazing and I love it forever, but
There's
it's
something
not
you
perfect.
brought up, though, that made me remember this one point about after I watched this the second time. And that's one thing that you will learn if you ever do anything about screenwriting is just how to set up a character so that you like them in the beginning. But what I love about this movie is it sets up Alec so you don't like him right when you first see him. And it's a very subtle thing, and I don't know if you notice it when you watch it. When they go past the guy in the lab, typically you don't want to shoot somebody who's unarmed. But Alex sees the unarmed lab guy who's just like, this is my job, working on the lab, and he shoots the guy. I think instantly you feel like, wait a minute. Just in your subconscious, you're like, maybe I don't like this guy.
Yeah, it's all in that expression, which goes back to our discussions about Bond sometimes being a cold-blooded killer, but for the most part, he's not. Whereas 006 just has this stone face as he's murdering this unarmed guy. Had he been the scientist from On Her Majesty's Secret Service who threw the chemicals at Bond,
Yeah, exactly. There's that subtle difference of a guy who's just doing his job, and it's just such a subtle thing.
That coupled with the idea of for England, James, and it's like that's kind of if M were to call Bond and say we're doing this for England, you'd be like that's kind of on the nose. That's kind of weird.
I got one other point now that you brought that up as well. Ormov, there's a point where he starts running for the plane. He's like, "Stop firing!" Where they could still catch him, but he's like, "No, just hold off." And he smiles and watches as he drives towards the plane. He could keep firing and shooting and chasing him, but he's kind of like, let him try. Let's see if he escapes because it's good for us.
Yeah, with some headcanon, you can believe that maybe he wanted Bond to escape.
Hold your fire! Wait! Hold your fire! Wait!
But I think it's more likely that he just, he's looking at Bond kind of laughing like, really? You really think you're going to survive this? And Bond survives by a thread. And he succeeds in blowing up the facility. So it's like, where's the upside for Oromov here? And then, Alec gets his face burned. This is another one of those instances where if you think about it too much, you'll go crazy. And that's where I try to imagine that in the background, Oromov and Trevelyan had some plan that was thwarted. I mean, obviously the goal was to capture Bond and disarm the bombs. So, but that's what I mean. I try to just focus on the fact that it's vague and not pronounced, and that maybe there's an answer if you sat down with those two and they told you the plan. But it's quite clear that Bond wins the day. And really, that's all you need to know. It's not like Octopussy, where the story itself doesn't make any sense because the plot doesn't make any sense. Here, the fundamental story still checks out, even if there's some uncertainties and unanswered questions. And that's the whole thing, right? Is that we're led to believe that 006 died defending his country and all that. Obviously, I think it works. I've seen the movie 4 billion times, and I really don't have a problem with it, but you do at some point have to ask yourself, did he want Bond to survive? And it's kind of, it reminds me of the argument you made, Scott, back in For Your Eyes Only, where you're like, well, Crusados maybe realized he wins either way, right? Crusados was like, if Bond dies, he dies and he's off my plate. If Bond survives, he'll get the ATAC for us. So with this, it's like Alec is like, well, whatever. I thought about asking Bond to join my scheme. I assumed he wouldn't.
I did think of asking you to join my little scheme, but somehow I knew 007's loyalty was always to the mission.
So we're going to go on this thing together. I'm going to fake my death. If Bond survives, then I'm dead. If Bond doesn't survive, then everybody's going to assume I'm dead anyway. And I get to go assume control of Giannis. It really doesn't matter.
You never loved me. You never loved your friend.
Never to his friend.
But that's what's so fascinating about that moment.
Finish the job, James. Blow them all to hell.
You have 10 seconds.
What is Bond doing during that
10.
countdown?
9.
He's surrendering. So Bond is surrendering for the sake of Alec Trevelyan, which is why Alec Trevelyan expedites his own execution by yelling out for England James, because suddenly his plan with Oromov was backfiring because Bond was giving up.
007's loyalty was always to the mission, never to his friend.
Bond knew they were done for, so he did what he could to try to save Alec, even if it meant blowing them all up by cutting the timers in half. So ironically, Alec would have achieved his goals if he would have just let Bond surrender. Instead, they do the whole fake death thing, and then that just pisses off Bond. And we see when Alec dies, that's like the most emotion we ever get out of Bond. And it weighs in on another heavy theme of this movie, which is about trust.
He doesn't fit the profile of a traitor.
It would seem presumptuous, General, to blame this incident on Siberian separatists before the whereabouts of your own people are determined.
The British betrayed them.
He'll betray you. Just like everyone else.
This is true.
You either take your chances with me or your fellow countrymen who killed everyone at Serenaya.
Trust me.
Trust.
We see what Bond got for trusting somebody so completely.
I trusted you, Alec.
Trust.
That just all weighs in on how heavy this betrayal was.
He was your friend, Trevelyan. And now he's your enemy and you will kill him. It is that simple.
In a word, yes.
How can you be so cold?
It's what keeps me alive.
Bond's entire existence as a spy is about trust.